Be Your Own Cheerleader is in 3 areas: psychological, spiritual, and cultural.
You are like bringing your whole self to what it is that you're sharing.
For so many South Asians and Asians, due to our cultural experience and living in America, that might start actually at a pretty young age, right? Realize that the I gets lost in the we.
Alongside your role as a leader, you're also sort of managing the dynamics of the room.
I want to hold my own and set boundaries here, but do it from a place of compassion and not just like, I've got to protect myself.
Does your team like working with you? Do they feel supported, and are they growing?
How safe do you feel? And I think that's a question that you have to have with yourself about the organization, that the team that you're in.
We have with us my new friend and very good friend, actually, Neelu Kaur, who is here. I'll tell you a little bit about Neelu. She's dedicated her life to amplifying the voices of Asian and South Asians, particularly women, in workplace and in life. She's the author of the book, Be Your Own Cheerleader. I have my copy right here for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. She's also a highly sought after speaker, facilitator, and executive coach. Welcome to Happy and Human, Neelu. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I feel like this has been in the making for so long, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
It sure has. It sure has. I know we've exchanged tons of messages, and we've even had a call. And I don't know, for most of the guests that have come on here, either one of us knows the guest a little bit better, or we're both brand new. But I feel like this is just a conversation amongst 3 friends. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks, Neelu, for joining us.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I'm excited.
There's a lot going on for you, Neelu, but what I love about everything that you post, whether it's on LinkedIn or, Instagram or through your book, as I've read it, it's very, very, very authentic. You are like bringing your whole self to what it is that you're sharing with the world. And I think that that's such a refreshing change of pace, because I feel like a lot of us feel like we can't bring our whole selves to work. And what do you think about that? Like, I know you've said a lot specifically about this topic.
I actually question I question when I do that, because, for example, it took me a long time to be able to create the book and bring my full self to this book, because there's so many aspects of me. Like, my book is Be Your Own Cheerleader is in 3 areas: psychological, spiritual, and cultural. And so if I think about what makes me me, those are big chunks of my life. And I think when I'm in different areas, different networks of people, I feel like they put their best foot forward always. And I sometimes struggle to put my best foot forward. Like, I feel like I'm pretending or faking or lying or hiding. And so being authentic to me has been a journey, and sometimes I still struggle with it.
So you're human?
I'm human. I'm human. I feel like there are people out there in the world that are just better at lying and hiding and coming across like everything's perfect and wonderful in their life. I think there are people out there that just do a really great job of that.
Yeah, but doesn't that catch up with you? Something I heard a long time ago is that, if you're putting together a facade or a persona, and people are gravitating to that facade or persona, you're actually missing out on the connection you would have with those people, because they're actually not connecting with you. They're connecting with the figment that you've created, right? Wouldn't that ultimately lead you to feel like you're missing out on these genuine connections?
True, if that was your goal and intention, right? Like, if you wanted to cultivate a lot of authentic relationships, then yes. But if your goal is to have just this persona that the world sees you as XYZ, then perhaps that doesn't mean very much to you. So I guess it really depends on what your intention and goal is in cultivating those relationships.
Have you ever heard the term integrity gap? Robin Sharma talks about the integrity gap, when the space between how you show up and who you are gets too large, that you get disconnected and you are pinging between the person that you think you should be and the person you are. And that can lead to a lot of dissonance, right? Because you're not sure what you should be and where you should be to who you should be, right? And I think we're sort of circling around that. And now that we're talking about it, I feel that for so many South Asians and Asians, due to our cultural experience and living in America, that might start actually at a pretty young age, right? And I think your book goes into that a little bit, from the culture of we. And now that we're talking about it, I can realize that the I gets lost in the we, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dinesh, when you said something about her mention of childhood, I think for us, like depending on what part of the country you grew up in and how much of a community, an Indian or South Asian community you had, it is like wider, right? Because you're toggling between these two things. But Neelu, I loved what you said in your book, and I should have highlighted it. But you talked about the I and the we, and I'll let you explain that to the listeners a little bit more. But you demonstrated it even with how you spoke about your toys with your brother and how your parents taught you to speak about your possessions. Can you share with the listeners what that means and what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it didn't occur to me till much later in life why they were doing this. But my parents, when we came from India, they would say, well, we were very poor. We didn't have a lot of toys, but when we were able to have some toys, they were like, this, you cannot say these are my toys. These are our toys. Everything was about sharing and group harmony. And that is what collective cultures and Asian cultures, Arab cultures, Latin cultures, African cultures, there are many cultures that are very tribal and collective and very we based.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have North America, which is very I based. And so what that means is that your I is around you and your nuclear family, and there's not that much emphasis placed on extended family, and it's about your achievements and the things that you want in your life. And the cultures that we come from as South Asians, it's about group harmony, how it appears to the others in our community, how our family perceives us. It's much more about shame being a source of discipline, right? Like these are things that we've grown up with, and neither is good nor bad. It's just really important to understand that we come from we and we're in an I. So how do we dance between the two?
So obviously there's the home implications of that, right? Like the whole, what is a good Indian girl, a good Indian boy? But what your book is really all about. So for the listeners who haven't heard about the book or seen the cover, the what's written on the bottom is an Asian and South Asians an Asian and South Asian woman's cultural, psychological, and spiritual guide to self-promote at work. And I think this is applicable to men as well. Mm-hmm. But I mean, because it shows up at work where we're told we're supposed to kind of fragment work and home, but it doesn't work that way. It's not that simple.
I think one of the things that shocked me the most is after my book launched earlier this year, I was getting feedback from introverts, from neurodivergent folks, like people, and it didn't have to just be women, and it didn't just have to be Asian and South Asian. It's just people who struggle with self-advocacy and sort of tooting their own horn. That's something that just doesn't feel natural for many of us. And so for some, it feels very natural. So I think the concept of self-advocacy and self-promotion goes beyond culture in some sense.
Absolutely. And tell us what you mean by self-promotion, because I think there's a misperception that means that you're egoic or prideful. And that's not what you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about self-advocacy where you speak up about your accomplishments, your credentials. If someone takes your idea, takes ownership of your idea, to make sure that you get credit for your ideas at work, because that happens a lot. It happens a lot for introverts, neurodivergent folks, people who can't speak up, for Asians, South Asians. Our ideas can get taken and then we don't know how to jump back into conversations. So self-promotion and self-advocacy is really about just knowing, having some skills in your tool belt to be able to jump back into conversations, to speak up, to share your desires, to share your intentions, and not just at work, but at home, because it's not as easy to do also at home. And how we are in one instance and environment is how we are in another. So these skills you can practice everywhere. I use the work as the context for practicing, but we can practice at home as well.
Yeah. What are some ways that, someone that's from a we-based culture can self-promote and self-advocate without crossing the line of seeming abrasive or seeming, like self-centered, I guess is the word.
So, Seema and Dinesh, I don't know if you experience this with your family. And I know for me, my mom just did and continues whatever my dad wants. That's it, right? Like that is no, you don't want to rock the boat. You just want to go along. We were taught that, don't upset your dad. So when you grow up in this kind of culture, what happens is you just feel like sharing your own opinions is something that's not do I even have my own opinion? Right? Like you start to question,
Right.
what's my opinion? What's the group's opinion? So I think for those of us that come from those kind of cultures, it's literally just a separating that there's a we and there's an I. And so when you're in a we context, that's when you want to use words like our deliverables, our outcomes. If we're in an I context, like a performance review conversation, or you're an entrepreneur and you're selling your services, you have to talk about your accomplishments, your credentials, right? So I like to think of it as a dial, and there's a we speedometer. Like if you think of a speedometer, there's the we part and there's the I part. So you are contextual, like you are authentically you. You're just adjusting based on the context.
Yeah. Okay. So that's helpful for the individual, right?
Right.
Do you have any tips that you can share? And I'm asking specifically for myself, but I'm sure it's relative or relevant to other people. What can I do if I'm in a meeting or if I'm in a group with folks that might be from a we-based culture and aren't versed in the skills you talk about in your book, other than buying the book or having them read it? What can I do to help promote their engagement or to make the space for them to share about their contributions, their achievements, and their input, basically?
As a leader, when you are looking around the room, you're reading your audience and you see, there's some voices that haven't spoken up. Maybe I should hand the mic over to them. So as a leader, you're in a room, you're in a conference room, you look around and you really read the audience. You say, these are people, and maybe they're women, maybe they're Asian women, maybe they're South Asian women, maybe they're introverts, maybe they're neurodivergent on your team, and you hand the mic over to them. You loop and thread them back into the conversation.
Yeah.
If you notice that someone cut them off, you make sure you circle back to them because they may not have the skills to jump back in the conversation. So alongside your role as a leader, you're also sort of managing the dynamics of the room. It is a lot to do, but if this is important to you and you want to create a space of psychological safety for your employees and your organization, it's something that I think leaders, the onus is on leaders to do that.
Yeah. Is it permissible to maybe do that outside of the group setting? Because sometimes I feel that, we're in a group, everyone's sharing, someone hasn't shared. And if I give them the mic or if I call on them specifically, like say we're talking here and I say, Seema and I've been talking, Neelu, you haven't said anything yet. What do you have to say? That rarely has resulted in a very forthcoming, productive conversation, at least in my opinion. And more often, it results in something along the lines of, "Nope, I agree. I don't have anything to add." Right. So I in my mind, like I'm doing this dance of like, am I putting someone on the spot and making it less psychologically safe, but I want them to contribute? How would in your expertise, how would you coach me to navigate that?
There's a concept that I call threading, and I'm actually not sure where it came from, but it's pretty amazing. Where
your eyebrows, it came from threading your eyebrows.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Actually, yeah, I used to say that. I was like, this is not hair removal. This is a concept for executive communication. It's, as a leader, you are threading people in. So you would say their name. Dinesh, we were just talking about XYZ. What are your thoughts? So you say the name to get the person's attention because their minds are going, just like all of us. We're human, right? You give them a brief context, because if you just say, hey, Dinesh, what do you think? Dinesh's mind is all over the place, and you're basically throwing him under the bus in front of everyone. So you say the name, brief context, what are your thoughts? And that person will have thoughts. They will say something. It's just a more compassionate way of threading them into the conversation.
So good. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because sometimes what's happened in my experience is that you, in the most compassionate intention, want to bring someone into the fold, but they're in their own head about like, I want to say something, but I know that every time I speak up, like they tell themselves a story, right? Like, I'm not good at speaking up. I'm not good at whatever. And you may or may not have had the trust or the time to have built up a relationship where you can be supportive and make them feel safe. And so especially in a situation where there's a lot of people around, or maybe there's like a high stakes discussion, it's almost like, from where I'm sitting, maybe there's a little bit of both, right? Like if you know generally that someone has issues speaking up, maybe there is a little behind the scenes, like, hey, I'm going to ask you like I'll make sure you have the space. Maybe just simply providing the knowledge that somebody's in their corner, even during that meeting, would be helpful. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that, Seema. Like, have a one-off with that person and just say, I want to amplify your voice in this team. And so let's co-create that experience. What would that look like? I'm going to hand over the mic to you a little more often.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think for me, sometimes when I think about I versus we, I don't think I've ever shared this story. So when I was 19, we went to this like Samaj thing. And, when you get to that age, there's always this stance of like, are you old enough to start talking about, what your prospects are? Maybe you're not, you're still in college. And then of course, us growing up here or just more modern in general, that's the last thing on our minds. And so I remember kind of having been in the situation where my parents, I didn't know how they felt about this stuff. That's the other thing, right? We don't talk about what they want, what versus like what I want, all of those things were not happening. And so you wind up in these awkward positions where, like, in this case, they started talking about a rishta. And I'm sitting here like, what do I do? What do I say? What's safe for me to say? Where is it safe for me to say that? How do I, so just sort of bridging back to the South Asian experience and how that might show up at work or at home in the most sneaky ways of, because maybe you have an unfortunate experience in one area, and then now you're telling yourself, well, the last time I spoke up for me, or I tried to speak up for me, it didn't work out, so now I can't do it in this other setting. How have you helped people? I know you talk about that in your book. What are some things we can do?
I think, we all have situations where we have things happen in the past and there's trauma there, right? So I think it depends on how big the trauma is.
Yeah.
Right. So if it's trauma that you really feel like you have to work through, that's where I think therapy comes into place, where that's really about looking in the rearview mirror and getting the help that you need to overcome the trauma. And I think that's where coaching comes into place for forward thinking, or like, here am I now, and this is how I want my life to be going forward. So I think there's support out there for South Asians and Asians. I think they are the most reluctant group to reach out for support. There's support out there.
What would you say to somebody who was like, yeah, I would hire a therapist? I feel like a South Asian therapist or a South Asian coach, wherever you are, right? Like, so if you're needing to heal the past, therapy, if you're looking forward, coach, for those of you who may or may not know. But I've had people say, well, yeah, I think that an Indian or South Asian coach or therapist would relate to me. But I'm also afraid that, especially if we're in this close community, that confidentiality might be breached. And it happens because, well, this, historically they have the doctor community that also takes care of every other member of the community, and then they talk, and that's not true for everybody. But people say that it's happened. What are your thoughts?
I find that so interesting because now, given the vast number of South Asian mental health professionals, you can virtually meet people who are not in your, you know what I mean? Like we're in the Northeast. I know, Seema, you're in Texas, right? Like
Mhm.
I have a hard time believing that if I was to reach out to a Texas therapist, that they would know my family in any way,
Mhm.
shape, or form, or anyone in my network. I don't know. Maybe we are small. Like I know the Indian community, we end up knowing somebody that knows somebody, but I find that to be really surprising if that were the case. Dinesh, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. Since COVID, like with platforms such as BetterHelp and things like that, we can find South Asians and things like that. And I think it's a overall net positive, right? I actually work with a personal trainer who specifically is South Asian. And prior to COVID, I would have never had that opportunity because not never, but none of the trainers at my gym look like me, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
train other South Asians. So I think it's a net positive. I think it's great. Can we pivot a little bit and talk about Tom?
Okay.
Yeah. I want
Let's
to talk
talk
about
about Tom.
I love how Tom always comes up. A lot of people have asked me about Tom.
Yeah, I want to talk
Yeah.
about Tom. And when I was preparing for your episode, I'll show you if you're on YouTube. My handwriting is terrible, but I wrote Tom and I put a face that was not happy next to him, right? You can see that. Who is Tom?
Tom was this senior consultant that I worked with on a project very early in my career who took credit for our work. He lied to me about the time that the meeting was the next day with a client. Yeah, just threw me under the bus.
Yeah. And initially, I was pretty angry at Tom. I really was. I was like, it goes against everything I stand for. In fact, at our firm, in our law firm, client service is very high. Running a profitable business is very high. But right up there, one of our core values is creating opportunities for other people, right? It's the lifeblood of our business. It's creating opportunities for everyone, regardless of how senior you are to how junior you are, to do things, to progress, to grow, right? And then I thought more about Tom, and then I got sad. I really got sad for Tom, in that where does Tom is Tom his real name, by the way?
No.
Okay, thank God, because I'm getting angry at the real Tom, and I'm glad to know that that's not his real name. Anyways, we'll keep going with Tom, and then I'm like, where does Tom have to be as a senior professional to take credit for, and you were pretty junior, right?
Very junior.
Like you had just started?
I had just started. It was the first job out of undergrad.
Right. And in their book, and everyone, I encourage you to read the book. It's fantastic. In your book, you talk about, the night before, you're there till 11 o'clock, you did all of it, and then you walk in and the meeting had started already. And
yes.
Tom just decided not to tell you that the meeting started at a certain time and led you to believe it started later.
Right.
Sitting here today, where you are, and you're an accomplished, you're successful, what do you think, like, Tom's experience has to be to usurp that from someone who has just started?
Tom probably had imposter syndrome and didn't know how to deal with it, so he wanted to shine bright at the expense of a very junior person coming in.
Right. And if you had the opportunity where you are now to coach Tom, how would you coach him?
I would ask very open-ended questions about why there was a need to do that to somebody that's very new and junior.
Mm-hmm.
How would you handle it as a coach?
That's a good question. Usually we ask the questions on this show. So I'm not prepared.
When Darsh was on here, he asked us questions and we got it. We had to answer.
Yeah.
We did. That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. I think I would really get to the root of where does Tom not feel safe? And regarding, his work performance, or how he feels the client perceives the entire dynamic and the situation, and really get to where he thinks the problem might be with sharing credit, or showing that there's a team there. And I would try to shine a light on that and examine whether that's true or not. And one way that, in my life, and I'm frequently in this position, I will have a sidebar with the client, and I will say, hey, can I enlist you enlist your help to create an opportunity for someone to take some space, and for that person to take the space, I have to relinquish it. I really have to intentionally relinquish that space, create that space. And so I'm going to fade to the back. That person's going to step to the front. They're going to do all the talking. And from a safety perspective, like, I need to know that you're going to call me if things are going sideways, instead of just like dismissing us. You know what I mean? And so, like, can I enlist your help to know that you're going to call me if you're not happy, or if you've got complaints or concerns, and give me the chance to fix it behind the scenes, so that, I don't feel that, you're going to be mad at me, or whatever negative thing might come from if someone less experienced is running the show when you thought you were hiring us. And like, I also say things like, don't worry about the bill, we'll take care of the bill. Like, we're all collaborating on the training here, creating opportunity. That's how I would handle it. How'd I do? I'm looking for validation.
Seema, what do you think? How would you handle it?
How would I handle it? Well, first of all, Dinesh, I think that's very, very creative,
Mm-hmm.
and super supportive. Actually, this is actually a situation that I'm coaching somebody through right now. A very, very similar one. And I always bring it back in any situation in life. I always bring it back to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when we're in this imposter syndrome, anger, fear, blame, shame, judgment, like feeling unsafe in any way, the tendency, as both of you know, is to blame the situation or blame other people. But it's always rooted back in self, right? So I find that what I typically have found that works best for me and how I raise my kids, how I used to interact with patients and now with private coaching clients is I will trace it back to them and I'll say, all right, well, say so-and-so has dismissed you or questioned you in a meeting or belittled you or not said hello to you in the morning. Like, what might be going on for them? Mm-hmm. And just helping my clients see like, oh, they're probably this person that's coming at this egoic, like Tom syndrome, we'll call it. There's a deficiency there. There's a scarcity mindset there of like, he's not good enough. And for whatever reason, he's needing to front and he's unable, he or she is unable to think about how that action is negatively impacting not just himself or herself, but the greater good.
Yeah.
And it's really incredible to always see clients shift from like, oh, well, now I'm not really angry. I feel lighter because I'm not carrying that anger. I'm not carrying that blame. I'm able to create more sympathy or empathy rather, and compassion. And now I can start to figure out like, how do I want to hold my own and set boundaries here, but do it from a place of compassion and not just like, I've got to protect myself. Because all you're doing is circling back and creating more of that negative energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would say, Tom, how old were you when you started feeling an imposter? And I'm pretty sure Tom would reflect back, and it was probably a time in his life when he was a scared little boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is kind of going back to like the Barbie movie and Ken and all the things, right? We talked about this with Vyasar when he was on the show from Indian Matchmaking. We talked about the idea that it's like lonely and you've got all these expectations on you. And so it should be easy for you. And if you're feeling at all out of like it is hard or like you don't know, then you need to just muscle up, Buttercup, and shove through.
Yeah. Can I amend my answer or augment it a little bit? What I would do with Tom? I'm still thinking about Tom, by the way. Very triggered by Tom. So I think what I said is, I think a good approach. But in my experience, that rarely works because you've got to have Tom buy into the idea that he is doing something that is wrong or harmful when, most of our actions come from a place that we think we're right. Like, this is the right thing to do, especially if he was intentional about it. So I really believe that every problem is a problem of perspective. And I was coaching someone on this yesterday. Very similar. No, there's no Tom in my life, trust me, but on very similar context. And for Tom, what I would coach him on is to shift the metric by which he thinks he's being judged. And if it was already a client, the metric that the client is looking for isn't whether you're brilliant, capable, or we made the right decision and you need to prove yourself. If you're trying to grow your work from a client, in Tom's case, the metric that he's being judged on now is, does he have a capable team? Because newsflash, Tom, not everyone could do all the work out there, right? Like, you're one person. And two, does your team like working with you? Do they feel supported and are they growing? Because ultimately, as a client, I know your team is going to be the one who's doing the work. You're very senior, right? And if they like working for you and they're growing, they're likely going to bring their best self and do their best work, right? They're not disgruntled employees at your place, right? And I would shift the metric and say, well, Tom, how can you show the client that you have a engaged, happy team that can support you to do all of our work? Because like, you're just one person, Tom. Like, you can't do all of our work. right? And I think that that would help Tom shift the metric to understand that what I'm doing is not ideal for my self-interest. And if I shift and include Neelu or include other people, that actually aligns better with my self-interest. So that's my amended answer. Thoughts?
I like it. I do like it. And I wonder, and if we just take current state, right? Most of
Yeah.
the time when we're brought into organizations as executive coaches or doing group facilitated workshops, the senior, like the people who get the coaching are at very senior levels. So
Mhm.
this was Tom at like a very midpoint of his career. I mean, he wasn't, I wouldn't even call a midpoint. I mean, he wasn't manager, he was a senior analyst. So I think if we look at reality, those levels in organizations typically don't get coaching unless, of course, they've sought it out themselves.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's just something I thought I had about the practicality of that actually happening. I think Tom would probably go many years and
Yeah.
probably did go many years
Yeah.
doing that before he received any feedback or got some coaching or assistance with this issue.
Yeah, Tom, if you're listening, my DMs are open. Feel free to slide in. We can chat anytime, Tom.
Well, and there's this idea that, so what if they don't like me? I'm not here for people to like me. It's antiquated, but it's still very pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
So this, in theory, may never come up unless it's brought to light for the Toms of the world in a way that is going to reach their soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to sort of bring into the fold here, Neelu, was the idea, this concept of, well, let's bridge this with Tom. Like, so Tom does this thing and basically puts you in a position where you feel like you couldn't advocate for yourself and share that you had contributed in a very meaningful way to the success of this project. And that part of you just sort of, if you think about it as like a kerosene lamp, if you will, it just sort of dimmed, right? And I think we dim our lights quite regularly when we don't bring our full selves to work. This concept of marrying, comes back to like we are from a collective society thinking, and then yet we have to figure out how to self-promote. What is the impact of not bringing your full self to work? First of all, let's back that up and say, what does that mean to bring your full self to work?
I think bringing your full self to work is the concept of feeling safe enough to share things about you that, let's even take pre-COVID, when it felt like you would walk into a building and you would leave your personal Dinesh would be left, who you are as a human being, be left at the door. And then when you walk into the building, it's lawyer, it's attorney, Dinesh, right? And it felt like there was a separation, a physical separation. And then COVID happened, and then we were 100% virtual, and people would see into our backgrounds. You would see pets or children or grandparents or multi-generations people in the background, and then your collectiveness was coming out. So I think this time where people had a glimpse into our personal life is where the concept really illuminated for me.
Yeah. So, for example, if we were on a team meeting, the three of us, and we had a weekly meeting on Thursdays, and I had to log off every day 15 minutes early on this scheduled meeting. That's where I think that's kind of the example that's coming to me as to, do I share that? Do I share my reason for logging off? Do I not share my reason for logging off? Can we explore that for the listeners and sort of take them through the very multiple perspectives of what that looks like? Because there's not a right or wrong, right?
Yeah. And Dinesh, I really love your perspective when we were talking before we started recording, I think was from the employer perspective, and then you have the individual perspective. I think if you feel safe as an individual, it is something I call permissible distractions, where you let people in your group and your team know up front, like, hey, I have to leave 13 or 15 minutes early because to take care of my grandparents or my parents or my whatever you feel like you want to share, but you're allowing yourself to model that so others feel safe to say, yes, there are personal things that can take place and that can take me away from work. Now, I loved your point, Dinesh, of as an employer, what information do I need to know? And I never really never really thought about it through that lens. I've always thought, because people that have come to me have said, what can I share with my manager? And then the
Right.
managers will say to me, how do I manage this dysfunctional team?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, my perspective is that, and this is coming from multiple perspectives, as a coach, as an employee, as an employer. My perspective is that if you don't feel safe sharing it, um, there isn't really a need to find a reason that you think your employer will approve of, right? Or only share reasons that you think that are legitimate, or they will think that are legitimate, right? And in fact, any reason is legitimate. If you don't feel safe sharing your reason, you don't have to share it, right? Same with like in our virtual world, in that, if you want to keep your camera off, right? I don't think you need to say, give a reason of why my camera is off. In fact, I just say, hey everyone, I'm going to keep my camera off today, but I'm here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And many times I'm here, I'm ready for the camera, and I was just on a Teams meeting and I'm now on Zoom and my camera won't work, right? So I have to
Mm-hmm.
like shut down and restart and reboot, but I'm here and everyone's on camera, like, hey guys, sorry, camera's not working today, right? And I think that's totally fine. I think that's totally fine to not feel the need to have a reason, and only share if that reason seems like it's palpable, right, or is legitimate, right? That was, I think, at the core of my perspective.
I think for me and in my experience, it's been more, I've found more success when I share, because it's aligned, right? Like Dinesh, your example of like, well, I've got to go to this class and my favorite teacher normally teaches at this time, but now I have to go at this time. Like that is superfluous information that doesn't have any bearing on what it is that you're asking of me, right? Am I giving you my understanding that you need to leave the meeting early? Yes, done. I think there's this stigma, especially for moms, in a different way than other situations, where it's okay to be a mom and be very high achieving. You can have both, and you can be both and honor both.
Mm-hmm.
But when we sit there and criticize your decision to say leave early on Thursdays because I'm choosing to be the one to take my kid to swim class,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's something to be celebrated, right? I can empathize with that mom. I'm willing to say, oh, okay, so she's going to be gone, but that's okay because now on Tuesdays I have a doctor's appointment, or I have this, or I have that. It just, to me, breaks down a little bit of the mystery and the barriers. Similarly, when my husband, he is an ICU doctor in pediatrics, and something that he sort of has shared publicly is that he would go in to do a job, right? Like kids' lives are on the line. I'm here to do a job. Let me just look at the monitor. Let me see their heart rate, their blood pressure, their this, their that. And when they're trying to work with nursing and therapy and all of these things, it very quickly can become robotic almost. And what we coached on together is him kind of realizing like, oh, if I talk to my nurses about like, oh yeah, my kids are doing this activity, or, oh, we're going to the pumpkin patch, or it just makes them have a little bit more buy-in to then say, oh, you know what, when Dr. Desai was snippy with me that one day, like I know him, like I know who he really is. He's not a jerk. And so they're willing to be more forgiving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's no right answer, like we said. I think that um, even with this individual person, like the different things come up in life, right? We've all got things going on in life. It could be large, it could be small, and I think it's really individualistic. But I think at the core, and Seema, we talked about this a little while ago. One of my favorite quotes is by Albert Einstein, and I think it goes: "The best decision we can make is to decide we live in a friendly world or friendly universe, as opposed to a hostile world, hostile universe." And I think that if you've got something going on, deciding that you live in a friendly world and sharing it, and trying to find a collaborative or a suitable approach that works for everyone is, at the end of the day, probably 9 times out of 10 will be a beneficial endeavor.
Yeah. Neelu, where do you fall on this?
I just thought of, I don't know if you are familiar with the emotional bank account from Stephen Covey.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think depositing, so the concept is that you deposit more than you withdraw with relationships. And I think sharing your personal life and sharing things that are relatable to you is actually is putting money in the bank, right? Like you're crediting all of these things. So you're right, Seema, when your husband is snippy with his team, they're like, oh well, we know him so well. We know we've built this bank account. We know that we have this rapport with him. So that's where my mind was going, was these are deposits in this account when you share personal aspects of yourself, so that your team and your leaders, everyone gets to know you in a more relatable way.
Yeah.
So I'm all for sharing as long as it feels safe. So depending on what you want to share.
Right.
Exactly. I love how you always meet people where they're at. Neelu, you've done this. I've seen it over and over again, where your thing that you highlight is what is about this situation is going to make you feel safe.
Right.
Because without that, it's really just setting yourself up to have an undesired outcome.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And then the other thing we were talking about in the pre-show was even something like chronic illness. A lot of us have chronic illnesses, things like diabetes or an autoimmune thing, or maybe we're just fertility is a big one, right? Like I remember having family members go through and they're going through IVF treatments, and the hormones are just, I mean, I've never experienced it, but just kind of knowing what I do know, it can be a very, very rough and lonely journey. And so where does that come in? How do you help your clients in situations where there's a chronic illness and they want to just be their best selves and they want to create that success without the stress, but they're not sure how to do that as far as it relating to work and teams?
I think it's like start small, like in your team, if you have a chronic illness, like an autoimmune issue, and there are regular, like for me, I have an autoimmune issue and I've had it since I was a teenager. So once every 3 months, there's a shot that I need to get in order for me to manage it. And the process takes about 2 to 3 hours because I have to get the shot and then wait. They make me wait each time, even though this has been going on for years, just to make sure I don't have a reaction to it. So if I was working at an organization, I would probably have to let people know that I'm going to be away for 3 hours on this one Tuesday morning from X time to Y time, right? But as an entrepreneur or solopreneur, you don't schedule. So there's a little bit of safety there that you don't have to share this. But I think if you are in an organization and you have something you're dealing with that's going to keep you away for an extended amount of time, it's really helpful for others to know. And you'd be surprised. I'm sure there's people that would be very compassionate and say, okay, this is like a standing meeting that you have that you cannot, it's a non-negotiable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. I think you have to, establish that boundary, and you'll find more often than not, almost I would say exclusively, you'll find more support than we tend to think there is out there.
I also have been working with women who are closer to retirement. And one of the things that they're struggling with is they're going through menopause, perimenopause, menopause, and their minds they're in, whether it's HRT, hormone replacement therapy, or they're doing other things, the hormones are impacting their ability to focus and concentrate. And so how transparent can they be? And I think for women, there's just so many life stages that women go through, whether it's Seema IVF that you were talking about with your family members, or, so it's like, how safe do you feel? And I think that's a question that you have to have with yourself about the organization, that the team that you're in, like, what is it that feels safe to share? And I think everyone's on their own journey with that. And I think women that are closer to retirement, they feel like there's already ageism in corporate America. So if they share this, it's like, oh no, they're going to think I'm even older. And there's a concept of being unrelatable because I'm in tech, right? I work a lot with tech people. And once you get past a certain age, you're almost seen as just outdated. Even if you're like one of the smartest people, you're just like, well, I can't relate to you. There's ageism going on there. And in which cases women feel unsafe to share that they're going through HRT, they're going through hot flashes. They can't be under these bright lights because they're sweating so much, right? Like there's all these things that happen. And I think it comes down to safety and where you feel safe to share.
I'm just thinking about what that would look like, because I've had a lot of women tell me about that experience, and just sort of stepping into what that would feel like to already be in like tech, where generally speaking, that stereotype is the younger you are, the more with it you are, and the more capable you are. And that's, of course, not true. But to then, and also be a woman in tech, that's a whole other layer of it. And then to have you be in that part of life where you're experiencing hot flashes from things. So I can see why that would certainly be.
I was actually at a gathering conference thing, and the main speaker was under these bright lights, and so she was sweating, and she's closer to, say, 60, or I don't know how old. I'm very bad at guessing age. I think the older we get, the harder. I feel like it's the harder it is to gauge age. I don't know why. I have a very hard time like guessing the age of people. But if I had to guess, she was probably in her late 50s or early 60s. And so she actually said to the audience, like, I'm sorry, I'm having a hot flash. And there were women that giggled and laughed and could relate. And then there were others that were just like, wow, I can't believe she just said that. But that's what happened. And for her, that was true in the moment. And so she said she felt safe to say it. But yeah, there's situations and contexts where you don't feel safe to say that.
Why do you feel like this is kind of more prevalent in like the South Asian community in terms of safety and all of those things? Or what have been the trends that you've noticed?
I think it's women. I think it's mostly women. I think it's underrepresented voices. It's people who just don't feel safe to share and speak up. And if there's medical conditions, if there's anything going on, that adds this added layer of challenges about speaking up in any way, shape, or form. So I don't think it's only Asians and South Asians. I think it can be anyone that struggles with sharing and bringing their full self to work. I really think that the culprit for us as South Asians is that it wasn't behavior that was modeled to us. So whether you were raised by immigrants or you were born in South Asian countries and then you migrated here, your family, if you come from an immigrant family, it's behavior that's not modeled to you. And so you just don't know how to speak up. The idea is just to keep harmony, don't stick out, right? Like I'm sure your family would maybe compare you to your cousins, or so-and-so is doing this. There's this competition, but the idea is that you don't want to stick out in any way, shape, or form. You just want to do what's asked of you, and you want to succeed in your accomplishments. That's a very South Asian and Asian tendency of overachieving. But I think in terms of speaking out, it's like the idea is that, we are a group, and we identify as a group. So if you do something wrong, it impacts all of us. We will look bad. It will be shameful to this group.
Yeah. On the topic of shame, in the pre-show, we talked about superstitions and more particularly nazar, right? How do you see that showing up in the type of work you do, and how does it impact the self-promotion, the cheerleading that you talk about in your book?
So nazar is very interesting because in South Asian cultures, let's just say South Asian cultures, I'm sure we've all heard of this, that whether your mom would put a black dot on you before you'd leave the house, or it was the idea that do not celebrate anything early, or do not celebrate it, don't talk about it until it actually happens. So the subtext of those messages as a child is that I don't know how to celebrate, or I can't celebrate. And so then when you get into corporate America, if you are not able to celebrate your small successes, you are not going to be able to be your own cheerleader. So I think celebrating small wins, the reason that we struggle with it so much as South Asians is because the subtext of nazar and the superstition around celebration of things has been there from the onset, and we've inherited it from generations. And I'm not here to say that's bad or good. I actually feel like I'm a pretty superstitious person. Like one of the things I don't know, I'm sure you all have very different ones in your family, but the one thing that we have is don't celebrate your birthday early.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. So that, again, don't celebrate early. And again, you can celebrate early, but I refuse to celebrate early. These are things that generationally, ancestrally, like I've inherited. So we just bringing it to the forefront to know why you're doing certain things I think is helpful. Yeah. But when it comes to cheerleading and being your own advocate and self-promoting, it's like taking time to actually pat yourself on the back when you can, because it's not, again, it's not behavior that was modeled to us. We don't know how to do that well.
Everything is so fragile in life, and that and it's all given to us, and we don't really have any control, right? Like you guys know what nasib is, right? And you really don't have any control. Your life is written, and you're going to live it that way. And that, to me, is at odds with this this another thing of celebrating your birthday, right? Like if your nasib is that you're not going to make it to a certain birthday, and then you celebrate it early, like I'm having difficulty reconciling the two. And like what is the genesis of the thinking there? Is it scarcity? Is it that life is so fragile, or that we're actually in control? Because if we're in control and we celebrate it, you might not make it to your birthday. Do you guys have thoughts on that? Like where is all that grounded in?
Such an interesting paradox, and I haven't really thought about that specifically around birthday and kismet and knowing, like, again, everything, if it's predetermined, right?
Right.
It's a blueprint.
Right.
My dad always says, like, and even in Ayurveda, the moment of conception is your blueprint. Right. So that we get this blueprint concept so much in our culture, despite whether we're Sikhs, Hindus, Jains, Sindhis, whatever we are.
Yeah.
It's there. And so, yeah, I actually don't have any answer for that, but I'm so curious about it now that you've said it.
So it's like almost like on one hand, we don't have any control, right? Because there's like this nasib, and you're meant to get married to the person you're about to get married, when you're going to get married, right? It's all written, right? On the other hand, we could go to a mandir and we can do a puja, or we could wear a stone like a ruby or something, and then change it, right? Right? Like we can do like this havan and change our nasib or change our luck or any of that stuff. And I've always had trouble figuring out which is it. Like, do we have control or do we not? Because like most of the times you tell me I don't have any control. It's all predetermined and predestined. The person you're supposed to marry is the person that's out there. But then you check your horoscopes to make sure you found the right person. But if not, you could go do this puja and make the horoscopes get right. I don't know. Seema, what do you think?
Oh, I have so many thoughts on this because so for those of you, I didn't know this till this morning, but there is an annular solar eclipse happening. Yeah. I think it's like right now, and Austin is like right in the path. Well, technically San Antonio, but we can see it. If you're in Austin, there's a way to do it. And so anyway, I was reading about what that meant from a Ayurvedic and astrological sort of thing. Cause I was thinking about this very topic. Right. And, so there was a scientific explanation, but the article I was reading was talking about how we eclipse our light, right? Like if you go with the premise of we are energetic souls that are just having a human experience that's limited by the five senses that we have, right? And this concept of time and space being linear, we like these emotions of like fear and things sort of eclipse our ability to actually create, for example, the partner that we're going to marry winding up in their path so that you can meet them and marry them, right? Or whether you have children or not, or what your general temperament is like. And so I almost kind of, my answer, long-winded as usual, is what if it was both? Like I kind of subscribe now to this multiverse where the idea that, you can allow yourself to fall to this energy of this is happening to me, and you'll live life out like that. And also you can do things that are going to micro shift. And as long as they're based in the faith that you do have control over what type of energy you're putting out there, you're going to be able to then essentially make quantum leaps into an existence that might not have been open to you had you fall into this energy of like, this is all Qismat, Nasib, whatever. That's the woo-woo-ness in me coming out. I don't know.
Right. And then it's like, where does the law of attraction play into this, right? Like there's just so many unanswered questions, I think, around this topic.
Yeah, for sure. And
no wonder we're confused, right? Yeah. Yesterday, Vasavi said A, B, C, D. No wonder we're also confused.
So funny. And the other thing I was thinking about as you guys were talking about Nazar was we're told like you have to succeed, right? You want that like best job, and you want your skin to be, guys, I don't actually believe this, but traditionally fair skinned or whatever, like that's sort of the thing, right? You pray for, or you hope for, or whatever else. And, you want these outcomes in the job. But then when you get it, and you get like other people would praise. So like going back to when I was 19 and we were in the Samaj meeting and somebody would compliment my parents like, oh, she speaks Gujarati. Like, oh, that's so nice. My mom invariably would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that out loud. And we would come home from these things and immediately she's like najarutaring, right? Like, so she's got this, the muddy, the black pepper and the whatever, right? And she's frantically like doing this business. And you're like, okay, what happened? You want me to be good. Like I learned Gujarati, I got straight A's, and yet you're shoving me into this room and hovering pepper all over me. What does that say? It's very conflicting. It's very confusing.
It's so very confusing.
What do you do? You know?
I think, you know, at this stage as an adult, right? Like we grew up with these things. We grew up with this. I think the way I like to think of it is I'm a kid in a candy store. I will take the good, the things that are so good from our culture, which I believe for me in my life are yoga, are Ayurveda. There's such beautiful aspects of our culture. And then there are some things that just don't work for me. And so those I will put aside. But I think with the superstition piece, it's a question I still ponder and sort of wonder like, how much of this do I want to buy into? What do I want to leave behind? And I think for me, it's always a question mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We have lots of superstitions and they come and they go. And, you know, we still do the black dot and we don't celebrate the birthday. And I think that like I reason like, if it is right, I don't want to be the person to find out, right? You know, like if this thing does exist, I just don't want to be the person to find out.
I had the most bizarre thing happen a couple of weeks ago. So in my family, there's a superstition that do not buy shoes for someone. If you buy shoes for someone, you're going to get in a fight. There will be arguments. There will be fight. You don't buy shoes for anyone as a gift.
Yeah.
So I just assumed like my parents, they're old school. It's a joint account. Everything comes out of one account. So it's fine. So I was out with my partner and we found shoes that we both liked. And I was like, okay, I bought it. And then as soon as I bought it, I said, shit, oh no. And I kid you not, that week we got into 2 fights and we never fight. Like we are not a fighting couple. We have very good conflict resolution skills, the two of us together. But that week was a tumultuous week. And I said, I am never going to buy you shoes again, or you need to pay me back for those shoes because let's like end this shoe thing. And he said, Neelu, it's done because we had the fight. We're good now. But yeah, so is the shoe thing true? Is it self-fulfilling prophecy that happened because I believed in my whole life that buying shoes as a gift for someone would cause fights? It did cause. It caused 2 big fights that week.
You got to test it. Okay, I'm going to send you my address. I would like a pair of 9 on clouds.
Yes.
And let's test it. Let's see if we get into a fight.
Yeah. No, let's not.
No, but we have the same thing. Anjana and I frequently are in the kitchen at the same time or opening packages, and she will not hand me something that's sharp because you'll get into a fight. So she'll put down the knife on the counter or the scissors on the counter, and I have to pick it up. It's just, I don't want to be the one to find out if it's true or not. So like, what's the extra step in like, putting it down and grunting and then picking it up? So I do, as much as like we talk about the superstitions and like whether they serve us or not, there is a component in my mind that grounds us to our roots, right? Because that's what we grew up with. And so we don't eat beef. And my wife is Sindhi and, as close as to me without being genetically me is my wife, right? So, but her family, they do eat beef, right? And, we don't eat beef. And while it's superstitious about the cows and it's religious and all of that stuff, we don't think of it that way. It's more as a singular thread from my children to my parents on a topic of relatability. That's how I think about it, right? Because like, when we go to their house and they're eating a hamburger in their house or outside or whatever, I feel like it's one less thing that they can relate on. But if we all sit around the table and, no one's eating beef and we're all eating chicken instead, they're a little bit more connected, a little more relatable. That's one topic or one thing they have in common. Because let's be honest, my 85-year-old mom and 85-year-old dad have very little in common with my 7-year-old son, right? Outside of their DNA and me, right?
Kind of going back to what grounds us, right? Like just the superstition we grew up with was, you shouldn't have books. You don't touch with your feet, books, food, or money, right? Like, and even to an extent of like wallets, right? That like, it's not the paisa itself, but it's even a credit card or the wallet, what it symbolizes, a purse.
Never put the purse on the floor because money will fall out. Right.
Yeah.
It's like all of these things that we all have. Yes.
Yeah. And it's sort of, when I was growing up, it was just like, don't question it. Right. But for part of it, I think for me is when we can ground those roots into something logical. Dinesh, for you, I love how you talked about it generationally, just a thread, but also for me, it's more like, all right, if we carelessly, our feet are not clean. If you buy into this idea that the feet touch the ground and all of this, and it's not dirt, it's, disrespectful, then what you're putting out there is like an energy that's less than gratitude for what it is that you have. And when you're not grateful for what you have, then how can you ever amplify into more abundance, right? So not with a book, it's like, I'm very, very clear with my kids, your feet should not touch the book. Don't ever step on a book, because then knowledge is cut off from you if you're going to not respect the fact that it's there for you to take, right? When you can rationalize it, I think it helps make sense and crystallize. But the other thing, Neelu, that you kind of going back, you're a big practitioner of something called NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which I think is super culturally, it kind of resonates very much. Can you tell our listeners what NLP is and how you use it in terms of high performance executives and things like that?
Yeah, for folks who don't know what NLP is, when you think of Tony Robbins, he's sort of the father of NLP in some ways, even though he didn't create it and he's taken it and done different things to it. But many people understand NLP through the lens of Tony Robbins. But NLP was actually created in the 70s, and it's a communication strategy I like to think of it, the way I like to describe it that helps me think about it and explain it is, you don't expect people to meet you at your bus stop, you meet them at their bus stop. So it's communication skills to meet people where they are. And so that's helpful in sales conversations. It's helpful in building rapport. It's helpful when you are trying to influence people to do certain things, and not in a manipulative way. It's just that you're portraying your opinion in language that resonates with your audience. So you're always meeting people, whether it's a person across from you, whether it's an organization, a team, like a conference you're speaking at, the language you use is meeting people where they are. And that's how I like to describe NLP. And so it also...
No, go ahead.
And what I was thinking of explaining that would make it solidify a little bit more, it's like the questions that you ask others is part of NLP in terms of asking more outcome framed questions, but also it starts with yourself. So the questions that you ask yourself impacts the way you communicate with others. So for example, if you ask yourself, why do I suck at XYZ? Like that's not a very empowering question versus saying, who can I ask for assistance to help me get better at XYZ? So that's more of an outcome frame question. So NLP really focuses on communication strategies, not just with others, but with yourself. How are you speaking to yourself? What is that internal dialogue? You have to get that sorted out before you can communicate and influence and affect and build rapport with others.
Yeah. You were on the Second City podcast a little while ago, right? And on that podcast, you said that the assumption is that linguistics impacts behavior. And I think it's said a lot in pop culture or social media culture that watch how you talk to yourself. Watch how you talk. Be careful of what you say to yourself. But I think that it's difficult for people to actually implement it. Like it's something that everyone knows, but it's difficult for people to understand why at a level to make it a priority and to talk about it, right? And I'll give you an example, right? yes, and I know this stuff, right? Academically, I know it. And yesterday, I was running around saying things like, "Man, my week was tough," or "My week like destroyed me," or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And yeah, in the moment, it seems so innocuous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I take a step back, and Seema, I think you'll be really really proud of me. And if you're on YouTube, you can see her face light up. Um, I was really grateful for having a busy week, right? It's the alternative is no fun. And from a place of gratitude, I'm like, wow, look at all the things I get to do. Like, this is absolutely amazing. Why would I talk about my week this way? It was like
Mm-hmm.
it destroyed me and it hurt me and whatever I would like funny thing I would try to say. How would you, from an NLP perspective, how would you, or what would you say to someone, so one and done, that we could just move on and be done with the negative self-talk and you know understand that it's really disastrous, could really harm us.
You said it perfectly. It does. Like, so you're basically, and words have energy, right? So if you
Hmm.
say, this week destroyed me because you were so busy with client work, what message are you sending to the universe about
Yeah.
abundance, right? Like, there's so
Mm.
many things that it plays into. I think what for me resonates a lot about NLP is linguistics and impacting behavior and the energy around our words. Like, if you keep
Mm.
telling yourself you suck at something versus saying, I'm not good at this yet,
Yeah.
like, there's
Mhm.
room for progress, there's room for improvement. I mean, yes, I do suck at math. I'm constantly figuring out ways to make myself better at simple math because I just am not good at math yet. And I
Yeah.
keep putting yet because I'm like, I don't know when I will be good at math, but it's coming. So there are certain things that we just know are our strengths that we
Yeah.
do really well that energize us. And if there's things out there that we want to get better at, the language that we use can really impact that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even something as simple as, even if yet doesn't seem appropriate for
Yeah.
you, the thing I like to tell myself, to tell my kids is, this is the area where I have the most room to grow.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So like, my son is super math inclined. And it's not that my daughter isn't smart or not, she can't do the math, but language is just so much, it comes to her easier. And so I
Right.
tell both of them, like, for you, you have the most room to grow. Like, you get to shine a lot more when you
Mhm.
improve in this versus for you, it's the other, right? And
Right.
that makes it feel like, okay, there's not a time frame, like, by when am I going to get good at this, right? It's open, which I think lands also.
Which is so beautiful, Seema. I think you make such a good mom. I'm sure you're such a good
Oh,
mom. Yeah,
So
thanks.
great. Yeah.
that's so
Thanks.
beautiful.
I
So
try.
now that we've sorry, Seema, now that we have mentioned that you were on the Second City podcast,
Hmm.
have you ever done any improv? Because I know you studied improv. Is there any YouTube clips of you out there of
Oh God.
improv?
Oh God, no. Because it's humiliating. Thank God there's no clips of it. But that's the point, right? And that's why I think for South Asians, improv is so good. We are so concerned about how we appear or how our family appears, how our group appears. When you are an improv, that all goes out the window. You might be barking like a dog 1 second. You might be asked to pivot and do something else. So it's not just about neuroplasticity of the brain, but I think for South Asians, it is so helpful just to get out of your own way and just to explore and be playful, which I don't think we were allowed to do very often because there was so much around shame and use that as a source of discipline.
Yeah. So would you recommend everyone to study
Hands
improv?
down. Just
Oh
even
wow.
just
Really?
even a class, two classes, three classes. One of my mentors years ago, when she was observing me facilitate workshops, and she says, I really think you could benefit from improv. So
Hmm.
I went because I trusted her blindly, and I showed up at this improv school in the village. And as I was there, I was like, I wonder, why did she send me here? And why, by the time I had did a handful of classes, I was like, I know exactly why she sent me
Hmm.
here. It really
Yeah.
just gets you to not focus on yourself, allows
Yeah.
you to be playful, and it's not about how you appear.
I love
Amazing.
that.
I love
And
it.
you even mentioned that in your book. You talk
Yeah.
about play it out,
Yeah.
right? And
Which is
how
something big in improv.
yeah, yeah. It's important to have fun because then it allows us to be our best selves and not worry so much about, like, then you don't get into that Tom syndrome, right?
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
good.
Yeah.
Neelu, you're fantastic. You're amazing. You're phenomenal. There aren't enough adjectives in the dictionary to describe the conversation we've had. Um,
Oh, thank you. I feel the same way about the both of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a tradition at the end of the show where we do a couple of wrap up, and Seema and I will ping pong a little bit on the wrap up as we wind down here. And the first thing is, you're an expert. We're all experts in different things. We all have our learned experiences, our history, and we want to give you the floor for as long as you need, 30, 60, 90 seconds, to teach us something that only you can teach us. Take it away.
I think for South Asian women, underrepresented voices, neurodivergent folks, people who aren't skilled in speaking up, those of us that come from superstitious cultures, I think practicing celebrating small wins is a great start. And not just at work, Brett, but at home. So if you grew up not being able to speak up and share what you want to do, even telling your partner that you want to eat Thai food versus pizza is speaking up. That's self-advocacy. So when we think of self-advocacy, we may say, oh, it's only in performance review conversations. It's only when I am pitching my service to this client. It's absolutely not. It's actually when you are in your family setting and there's something that you think needs to be brought up that you didn't feel safe saying. That has nothing to do with work, but that's self-advocacy. So I want everyone who's listening to think of self-advocacy, not just in a work perspective, but in your partnership with your romantic partnerships, with your children, with your friends, with your family. You can be your own self-advocate while we still embrace the beauty of our we culture.
We've been watching The Big Bang Theory. And there's this whole episode about Leonard, they point out that you just kind of are a yes man and you just go along with whatever Penny says. And it's just this comical unfolding of how he's like, I don't even know what that means. What do I do if I go home and she asks me what kind of food I want? I don't it was this whole thing. And the idea of celebrating or just saying something as simple as I want pizza instead of Thai food just blew his mind. And it was really funny. So the next question that we had for you was, so at the end of the show, we have this tradition of asking our guests a question to leave for the guest following. So the guest previous was actually Vasavi Kumar, and her question to you is this: she's going to ask you a question, and then you're going to get to leave a question for the next guest.
Okay.
All right. So, where in your life are you not saying it out loud? And if you didn't care if anyone was listening, what would you say?
I'm getting married in 2 weeks. And I have been so...
Congratulations.
I have been so silent about it. And I think because of the fact that I've already been married, that I feel like it's my second marriage. I feel like all of these things, there's a part of me that feels like I can't be my own cheerleader in this realm. And so, yeah. I met someone yesterday that was like, you are the author of Be Your Own Cheerleader. So you need to be your own cheerleader on romance. And I've been very quiet. It's been a tumultuous road for me. And so by me just sharing it here, it's like putting it out in the world that yes, I'm getting married in 2 weeks.
Is this the first time you've shared that? So publicly or socially?
Yes.
Terrific. Thanks for sharing it. Hey, listeners, I'm not sure if this is going to come out by the time that Neelu gets married, but whenever this comes out and whenever you listen to it, please go to her Instagram. What is your Instagram, Neelu?
Neelu Kaur, Neelu.Kaur.
Neelu Kaur, and be her cheerleader in the arena of love, right? Because even the cheerleaders need cheerleaders.
Yes.
Neelu, did you notice that when you said, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
We're so excited for you.
Thank you.
I did not, you and I have been chatting off and on for 9 months.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So cool. But did you notice that even during the course of this podcast, you referred to your fiance as your partner?
Yes. I realized after I said it because it still hasn't sit in. So this is both our second marriages and we're going to City Hall. We're making it very intimate. So there's a part of me, again, maybe it's the nazar. I don't want to celebrate it too early, but he is my fiance and I have not been calling him that. I've been just saying my partner. And after October 27th, I will say my husband.
Do you want to give him a shout out? Do you want to say something to him on the podcast that maybe is difficult to say in person?
I'm excited about getting married. I think he knows that. But I am really excited about getting married.
Amazing. So it's
Well,
your
we're
turn.
excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
super excited. So it's your turn. You don't know who the next guest will be, and you have the privilege and opportunity and honor to ask them a question that we will ask live on our podcast.
What is the first concert that you ever went to, and how does it shape your taste for music?
That's a good one.
That's a good one. How does it shape your taste in music? That's a good one. Thank you for playing.
Does it shape? Because it could not, right? Like it could be completely different.
Yeah.
But does it is a close-ended question. So maybe we say how does it shape, or how did it shape your taste of music?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Thanks for playing our version of Happy and Human, the game of the Happy and Human podcast.
I love that tradition.
We have to come up with a name for it. Or you know what? I'm not even going to say we have to. I would like to come up with a name for it. Look at my NLP skills just shining.
Yeah.
I'd like to come up with a name for this game. Okay. Well, the other part of this, Neelu, we at Happy and Human believe in generosity. We believe that it's the key to success, not just for ourselves, obviously, but for the world. So the Happy and Human podcast, in honor of each guest agreeing to come on and share their expertise with our listeners, we want to contribute in a small way, $20, $25, something, to a cause that is near and dear to your heart. So can you tell us maybe a cause that you'd like us to support and why?
I think anything that relates to vision for young girls. I think reading is so important. So I know that there's many orphanages in India where there are women or children that have vision issues. And so anything that would help young girls see and be able to read. For me, my books were such a savior for me growing up. I used to have debilitating panic attacks, and so I just didn't know where to turn to. And I think reading really helped me. I read a lot of spiritual texts at a very young age to try to find ways to control my mind. And I think reading is just a powerful thing for children to do. And I think now we've gotten so far away from that with devices. Even I am challenged with sitting down and actually reading from start to finish. I listen to audiobooks. I think vision and reading and education is just so important for children.
Yeah.
So good.
One organization that we've supported in the past is, I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called Room to Read. And
I have heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they work in India, and their tagline is "World change starts with educated children." So, how would you feel if we made a contribution to Room to Read?
I would love that. I think that's beautiful.
Terrific. The whole point of this is to bring awareness to different causes and organizations that are near and dear to our guests' heart, and that we can share with our audience so that they can become aware of the various causes that our guests are interested in. And by virtue of us, the three of us coming together, having a greater impact than just those who are fortunate to listen to our small and humble podcast. So that was the genesis of it.
That's so beautiful.
So Neelu, you've got a book. We've told us our Instagram. Tell us again. Tell us where can our audience find you, and outside of your amazing wedding that's coming up soon, what else are you excited about professionally, and what's coming up for you?
So yes, my book is Be Your Own Cheerleader. You can find it any place that you can find books. And my most active platform is actually LinkedIn. I post a lot more on LinkedIn. I have a whole team of support that helps me post on LinkedIn. So we're constantly putting things out there. So LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me, and Instagram. And what am I most excited about? Well, so I've been on this media circuit with my book. And so now I'm doing a lot more speaking engagements, longer term strategic advising for organizations to be more inclusive of underrepresented voices and women. So I'm very excited about upcoming work.